And we are live with Alex. Alex, you're going to have to help me with your last name, but I believe it's Chalonec.
Oh, very close. Chalonec. Yes.
Chalonec.
Yes.
Okay. And Dina Zoleo. Did I get that right, Dina?
Yes. Very good.
Yes. I'm excited about this show. It's two people from the Writing Revolution who have a lot to tell us about why writing is important in the educational process and why it's also one of the understudied things that we could actually really focus on if we really care about children understanding what they learn and making sense of what they've learned. We've also had previously on, we had Doug Lamov, and he was someone who basically said you should check out the Writing Revolution. And we were talking about reading. So first of all, welcome to my two guests, Alex and Dina. Thank you so much for coming on today. We were just talking a second ago. One of the things that is really interesting for me in doing this show and broadcast is we have different people come on who say, this is the thing that we should focus on that's really important. So as we were just talking, knowledge, what a child knows is one of those things. What you know helps you have something to build on to learn new things. We also have people who say that reading is very important because reading is the gateway to every subject that you want to learn. It's really hard to learn without knowing how to read. So now we're going upstream a little bit to writing. Writing somehow fits in this ecosystem of things that you must be able to do well if you want the learning process to work well. Can you guys, anyone, help me understand first how writing is located in this ecosystem of things that are super important for us to teach and to learn about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just as kind of we were speaking, that writing, effective writing instruction really becomes the conduit through which we gain knowledge. Right. So when students are taught how to explicitly write, how to write using more linguistically complex language structures, we're actually helping them to become more proficient readers. Right. So absolutely, reading is essential to gaining knowledge. But so often we see the students that we really work to serve, they come in without having that ability to read a lot of the complex texts that are put in front of them. Think of the primary sources or the novels or the articles that they're reading. So when we teach students how to write more complex sentences, when they see, research supports, when they see those sentences in reading, they are going to, when they're reading, they're going to better be able to understand what they're reading. So the writing instruction helps them access those complex sentences. Also, when we teach that explicit writing, we're able to really help them be able to think more deeply and more analytically about what they're reading. So, writing doesn't have to be this sort of siloed piece and, which do we really focus on first? It actually becomes that, that instruction that really helps to deepen students' ability to access the information.
And you're not thinking of it as a discrete skill, just like by itself. You're seeing it go across subjects, and every class that I take would have a writing component to it.
Exactly.
And to add on to Alex, sometimes our name, we all call the Writing Revolution, but to be honest, it's a little bit of a misnomer because we see writing, reading, and thinking as inextricably linked, that they're very much interconnected, and that when you write well and you're taught to use complex sentences, but also to plan your thoughts, it facilitates analytical thinking skills, and that, as Alex said, it definitely enhances reading. So yes, we see all three very much connected, and that when you explicitly teach, and that's the key word here, explicitly teach students how to write, there's a big difference, Chris, of what a lot of teachers, I was one of them, I'm sure Alex will say the same for herself. A lot of teachers know how to assign writing. They can come up with great assignments, but they don't know how to teach writing. And I was famous for that. I can assign, I taught high school for 17 years. I could assign a great writing task, but I didn't know how to actually teach a student how to write. And there are just different conventions in written text that are not necessarily intuitive for students, because a lot of times students and adults write the way they speak.
And the way that they speak is with a lot of ums and ahs and pauses and
fragments and
hand gestures.
Well, that's just it, right? We use a lot of those like nonverbal cues to indicate kind of meaning or confusion. So when students when that's stripped away, when all those nonverbal pieces are stripped away, now they have to write in a very concise way. Now they need to really rely on kind of those linguistic complexities of various sentence structures to fill in for this nameless, faceless reader all of the information that we typically would fill in with, are these kinds of things. So, that piece is often sort of taken for granted. And, I know I've seen, and we've all really seen how, students move on to the next grade. And then there's sort of like this assumption, last year's teacher probably taught them, how to write a topic sentence, or last year's teacher probably taught them how to summarize. There are a lot of assumptions made when students are given these tasks. We see from such a young age, students are being asked to summarize, write a summary of the chapter you just read. But inherent in that are so many layers of really challenging, cognitively challenging skills. To write a summary, you have to assume that the student understood what they read, and that they could discern the main idea, that they knew which details were really relevant to inform somebody. There's a lot, and then how to structure that response in a way that's concise and not repetitive, et cetera. So, a lot of assumptions are made, and not really taking into consideration also what students are developmentally ready for. Is a third grader really ready to write an essay? Not before they've been taught to write a sentence.
Right. But what you all are not saying, though, is you're not focused on sentence diagramming or grammar.
Oh, you read my mind. You read my mind.
It's not like, I think there's like someone like me, I would misconstrue what you're saying. Actually, if I hadn't prepared for this show, I'd misconstrue it as like teaching kids how to actually construct a sentence and the grammar and the dangling, whatever they're called.
Participle. Yeah, exactly.
Participles and all that stuff, right?
Whatever that is.
Which I use so much every day in my everyday life. But you're not saying that, right?
No, and that's very interesting, because we hear that sometimes too. Like, people will say to us, "Oh, the writing revolution! Finally, someone's going back to basics and back to sentence diagramming, and that's how I learned to write." And honestly, I mean, we teach grammar in the method, but we teach it in the context of students writing, and the strategies that we're teaching students are very much embedded in the content they're learning. Now, the difference is, Chris, is that and for many years, this is how writing has been taught. So it's been taught in isolated grammar lessons or in isolated writing lessons. Like, here's a writing lesson down the hall happening, very much divorced from content that students are learning. So when you actually look at the research, you'll see that teaching grammar in isolation it has no effect on helping a student learn how to compose. In fact, it may actually have a slightly negative effect. And so teachers will look at us and say, well, what do you mean divorced from content? Jill went to the store. Let's underline the predicate and the subject. That is so removed from what a student is actually learning. And so the strategies of the Hochman method are all embedded in whatever the knowledge the student is learning. So if you're learning about the Industrial Revolution, your sentence strategies are about the Industrial Revolution, right? Whatever you're reading, whatever content, it's embedded in content across all content areas, which is really the power of this, why we've seen it be a game changer in schools, because the math teacher, the social studies teacher, the science teacher, the English teacher are all using the same consistent language around writing instruction, where typically in most schools, we see that writing is sort of taught in silos. I'm doing the hamburger bun down the hall, and Alex is doing some other thing she made up, and the student is getting a mixed message rather than hearing a consistent common language about or instruction around writing.
That's really important, because it seems like from teacher to teacher, there isn't a shared premise about writing. So I go into my first class or my second class, and I might get wildly different messages from my teachers about the writing part. You said a word, compose, and I always work better with, analogs or analogies or metaphors or whatever to help me understand things. So when you say compose, I think as someone who played guitar for a long time, you learn scales first, right?
Yes.
You go up and down the scales, back and forth and back and forth.
Yes.
And then you start learning chords and songs. But while you are playing these new songs, you are constantly thinking about the scale that it's in and the key and whatnot. And you get to a certain point where you stop thinking about the scales because you've just got it down.
Exactly.
And now you're playing a song that you haven't played before in a way, because you're like now I'm not concentrating on the rote part of this. I'm concentrating on the art.
Exactly.
Like, I'm thinking,
Yeah.
but I don't understand the psychology in reading when you get beyond the scales, understanding the grammar of the sentence or whatnot, how that can be taught. Because in music, it's hard to teach somebody that next step. Like how to feel the song, how to like get the deeper meanings of the song. It's hard to teach that.
Well, I think that we use, to me, what's coming to mind, and I think that's such a perfect analogy, right? When you're learning any other skill, you learn those basics, you learn those foundations that you can build upon. What comes to me is that idea that, in order to break the rules, you have to know the rules first in order to break the rules. But here it's like you have to know the foundational skills before you can really expound upon them. So, we don't take in the method, we don't take for granted what the students may or may not know. And that's why we start at that foundational level of teaching those sentence strategies, and students learn them, become more proficient with them. And we start to build up. Then we start to build up to, explicitly teaching students how to plan first. How do you structure your ideas in a coherent way that's really going to help you write a more cohesive paragraph, a more cohesive piece? And then we're building up to a composition. So, eventually the students are going to be able to have those rote skills mastered, right? They can always be leveraging them. And honestly, they always still are beneficial in the classroom, even when students start writing on a kind of more proficient level, because those strategies are working in service of your content, right? So because they're embedded in the content, it helps to really reinforce that thinking about the content. You can't write at length you can't write about something you don't know. So if you didn't retain or understand that content, you're not going to be able to express it very clearly in writing. So it's working symbiotically in that sense.
And Chris, I was just going to say, we sort of don't get that, why writing isn't treated like any other skill. Like you said, I danced my whole life. So I had to learn tendus first before I actually got out. And a teacher expected me, my dance teacher said, now Dina, go out and do 5 pirouettes. But there is some assumption in writing that when students enter in September, like 3rd grade, okay, let's write a 5-paragraph essay, or let's write a really good paragraph now, when the student can't even write a good sentence. And so that's something that we face with as a challenge, because really we don't get it. We don't get why we really go slow to go fast in this approach, and we really build upon the sentence as the bedrock of the whole method, because if you cannot craft a good sentence, then we don't know what the paragraph composition will look like. But there's an urgency, Chris. There's an urgency because of just demands of standards and assessments to get kids to a final product sooner than they probably should get there, and that sometimes we're much more focused on the process. We value the product, but we also value that a good product really depends on having a good process. And, that's not necessarily sometimes seen with writing instruction.
Yeah, I think, I love the word that you said, craft a sentence, because, there's a difference between writing a sentence and crafting a sentence. And if you're a writing craftsman or craftswoman, craftsperson, you're told over and over and over that good writing is rewriting. But I don't think, when I think about my own kids, I don't think that rewriting is a big part of their life. I think it's like you do it, you spit it out. The teacher takes a red pen, gives you kind of like inconsistent feedback or really insufficient, weak feedback. Right. And you walk away thinking I'm a great writer. And I'll tell you like just a specific example of how that comes into our lives. Like as a parent, we had 2 boys that were going to college, and they had to, really think through the essay part of like, applying to colleges and all that. And there was a person in the suburbs who gets paid to hold these little things, these little meetings where they teach you how to write this paragraph. And she reads thousands of them, not paragraph, but essay. And she reads thousands of them. So she has this expertise, and the cost wasn't insignificant. So I was really just, my wife was pushing for it. I was like, no, we're not going to pay to teach anybody how to read. We know how to write. We know how to write. And actually the kids themselves were like, I'm a great writer. My teachers tell me I'm a great writer. Why would I need to go to this thing? Right. And we go and sit in this thing, and our eyes are big, and everybody's taking notes, because it's almost like they're telling us the meaning of life. It's the first time we've ever heard any of this. Yeah. I wonder for you all, like, how many things, why is this one of those things that is so important that we are now finding out, that I'm finding out, that teachers aren't even trained in, that there isn't like, widespread kind of knowledge of this, and it's just part of the, it's part of the training. Why are we finding out so many things at this late date that still aren't really taught or respected?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
And so most teachers do not, and again, I was one of them, do not feel equipped to teach writing because really training institutions, Chris, do not really have a lot of curricula dedicated to writing instruction. You can go your whole career you can go to college, you can go to grad school, and not learn how to teach a student how to write. It's a lot of let's create lesson plans and let's make great writing assignments. But really, teachers, I mean, they're well-intentioned, but we're not really equipped to know that there is a difference between assigning and actually teaching a student how to really write and express themselves coherently and with, precision.
And on that point, I think that there's been such a debate about, there've been the kind of clearly established reading wars. Well, there's also really the writing wars as well. Like, which is the best approach to teaching writing? We talked about that grammar piece, that focus on isolated grammar instructions, and you need to know all of these terms and how to identify them. And then there's the kind of the opposite end of that spectrum of creative writing and having students write memoirs, in fourth grade, and having students be able to, do a lot of journaling. So there's sort of kind of these two very opposite approaches to teaching writing. But what we see with the assessments, what we see through the research is that's not making the mark. And so teachers have, honestly, through their schooling, they haven't really been taught how to write. Then they go on to, their graduate programs or on and are not taught to write. And now they're in the classroom and they're, again, ill-equipped to be able to really effectively teach students how to write. And, your story reminded me of one when I was in the classroom still, after I was trained in the Hockman method. And one of the strategies we teach is that there are 3 ways to write a topic sentence. And so here's these 3 strategies. We practice them. The students were practicing them. And as I was walking around the classroom, a student kind of pulled me over and said, "Why didn't someone tell me this before?" And to me, it was like this aha moment of, why are we keeping this a secret from the students? This is something that there's ample research to support the merits of explicit writing instruction to develop students' ability to express themselves in a more complex way. So, why are we not teaching that? Why is that not the prevailing method?
I actually, when I listen to it, first of all, I'm tired of finding out new things that are super important that aren't being taught to teachers, and thus teachers are not teaching to students, right?
Yeah.
Like I feel like if we have this thing called experts in education, that they should all kind of like just have a meeting, come together,
agree on some things,
and then like go out and go forth and multiply and, teach everybody everything. One of the things that you just said that I think is really interesting along those lines, though, is that it feels like there are fads that come in and leave. So the back to basics movements about just kind of like the basics, learn how to write sentences, grammar, and all of that stuff. The 1970s with the, hey man, just like everybody do their own thing. And like, so in preparing for this, I was disabused of some things that I just take for granted. Like, the working in groups as the preferred way, or letting students don't care about the structure or the grammar so much, but allow students to kind of write what they know and what they feel and all that. Was a 1970s thing, and it feels like you guys now are creating, I don't know if it's a third way or if it's a mixture of both of those or if it's completely separate, but we're for sure this isn't a fad. We're for sure that this isn't something that'll pass.
I think that this is the method was built and based on research. So it's a research-based method that really looked at what are the strategies we can teach students to that actually have been shown to improve their writing. So, we are not saying that this is, you can choose creativity or you can choose foundational skills. This is, it's both together. This is creativity and foundational skills. Sometimes we get the feedback of, well, what about students' voice? What about their personal style? We should be developing their sense of who they are as a writer. But how does a student communicate their voice or their personal style if they don't have those foundational skills? right? Their message is going to be muddled. It's going to be, this kind of unclear writing. So we are not against, those pieces, but there has to be a focus on teaching students the basics, teaching students those foundations. And again, it's all integrated in what they're learning, because we know that, in school, but then also certainly beyond, and just in life, students have to be literate to be able to be successful in their lives and their careers, to be able to read a newspaper, to be able to be an activist, to be able to, write a letter to a boss. So, these are skills that are going to serve them long after they're outside the classroom.
You just said, so they need to be literate in life. But I think what a lot of people would take from that is they need to read well. And I don't think that writing is a very valued skill in the adult world, right? Like I do believe many adults get through a lot of their professional life with an email being the thing that they have to write most.
Right.
Yeah.
And even those emails are looking like crap these days, to be very honest with you.
That's the issue. It's right, because you're often, you can be judged, Chris, the way you're speaking about it. You can be often judged the way that email comes across, and that you want to be able to give kids the opportunity to express themselves regardless what path they take in life, the ability to express themselves with precision, with clarity, with coherence, that others can easily understand them. I don't really see, I don't see it to be a fad. I think that's going to be an opportunity for kids to just, again, just be very successful in college and beyond, in any job, anywhere they end up in life. And also, we focus so much on expository writing because that's the writing that really is about explaining and informing. And that's really important, that students have the ability to write, to explain, and to inform, and to, as Alex mentioned before, to different audiences, that they know that the way I'm writing to my friend about a car accident that just happened to me, unfortunately, is not the way I'm writing to Geico. It's very different. And so in this method, we really, it's a reader-centered approach. We really have kids think about the reader a lot of times, to not make assumptions, because a lot of times kids write without thinking of the reader. And this method really does have students, and the strategies really help them to think about their audience more, and then giving information to the reader. But I'm watching some of the comments coming in. So it's interesting because one of your viewers mentioned that they're getting great teacher prep about writing instruction, and that's very encouraging.
That they're on that just real quick. So it's Melanie Acosta who says, as a teacher educator teaching pre-service teachers to teach reading and writing, I disagree. Many teacher prep programs are preparing new teachers to teach reading well, or teach writing well, excuse me. I think we need to be careful about lumping the issue into the excuse that teachers are not being taught to teach X, Y, and Z, especially as it relates to content.
So no, I hear that, but what we're seeing on the ground in our experience, and because we are teacher trainers, so we have tons of courses throughout the country, and even we even have international interest, because writing is a weak area. It's a universal weak area. But what we're seeing at the teachers who are coming to our courses, these are the teachers who are in the actual trenches right now in teaching, and they're not seeing the results, Chris. They're disappointed, many of them, in the products that their students are giving them. And especially in high school and middle school, there's a real urgency. It's almost like they're the ambulance. They've got to come in. We have a lot of high school teachers, believe it or not, with over 10 years experience and more, coming in to us, saying to us, we need an answer. We don't know what to do on this. So
is that possible to be generational? So maybe if I was a teacher that got my training 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, there's a big difference between that person and the person who right now is going to be released as a teacher through a prep program this year or next year. Is there a difference? Is it really generational in our teachers that they may not? I mean, we probably still have a lot of teachers that had that 70s.
Right. And I think that could absolutely be just depend, because there has been this sort of pendulum swing back and forth, between the prevailing kind of approach to teaching writing. So that certainly could be. But, just to Dina's point, that we really are seeing that teachers are telling us that this is improving their writing, that they did not get this instruction before. And so, a lot of times they're kind of figuring out what might work and figuring out, if this approach is going to help their students. And we feel like because there is such a clear sense of what the research is, that teachers don't need to sit to figure it out. We can give them that path, which they can impart upon their students. right now students do not have the time to do it like a test and see kind of approach. We have this is an urgent need. This is an urgent crisis that we need to give students these skills. I think probably we can all agree about just equity in education and making sure that we know that the students are coming in often. The students are coming in at the start of the school year. They often really don't have those grade level abilities. They're almost beginning behind. So we have to provide them with that, the tools that they are going to need to be able to access the content, to be able to really level the playing field and be able to move them forward with what they're learning in schools.
Seems to me that if you're a classroom teacher right now and you're trying to figure out what you do next week on Monday, I always call it the Monday problem. What am I learning in any of this discussion that I can walk in on Monday and be better with? And I think teachers oftentimes don't get an answer to that question. They do a bunch of PD. That is what they call drive-by PD. And, a lot of it is meaningless. But what do you do when you have a workforce of people where there's a new research idea that comes up that is important and critical to their work, but it's not like they have a million hours of time to sit around and be retrained completely?
Right.
How does that work? How do you get people up to speed or transitioned into a better way of doing things?
Well, it's interesting because in our trainings, the focus is we're taking something that's very difficult. Again, most difficult skill to teach and to learn is writing. And what Dr. Hochman has done in her method is it's really been broken down in a very scaffolded approach where the sentence level work is at the forefront, which again, if you walk into most schools, you will not see this emphasis on the sentence. You'll see a lot of, just write, let's do paragraphs, let's do essays. But for us, again, it's at the sentence. And teachers leave, Chris, this training very excited, very empowered, because we actually are providing strategies that you can go back tomorrow. I can give you a strategy right now that you can use with your child right after this session that will help them to extend their responses and give more information to a reader and build a more
give me one right now.
sentence.
I'm a teacher. Give me one right now.
Okay. So one of those.
I'm not doing anything well, and I got to go back next Monday. Help me out.
So one of our popular strategies, and then I'm going to talk about some other strategies. But first, let me get to the most popular one, and that is because, but, and so. It's a sentence strategy that when you teach students the conjunctions to use because, it helps them explain why in a sentence, but helps them show change of direction or contrast, and so helps them show cause and effect. Okay, so I'm going to give you a perfect example as a history teacher of what I used to do and then what I did post learning Dr. Hochman's method. So I taught US history for many years. I may ask a student, you were in my class, Chris, and I would say, Chris, why was FDR a popular president? And so you would raise your hand and you may give me like one or two words to answer that. And really, at the time, I didn't realize assessment may be memorization from you or regurgitation of content from you. But once you leave our training, you say, wait a minute, instead of just asking an open-ended question like, why was FDR a popular president? And have kids answer that orally or in writing, take that and now give them a sentence stem. FDR was a popular president because, but, and so, and then have them complete that sentence using each conjunction in turn. So now you'll get a student to say something like, FDR was a popular president because he got the United States out of the Depression. FDR was a popular president, but his policy on the Supreme Court was criticized. FDR was a popular president, so he was elected to for 4 terms. Now a student, I think you can see, Chris, that by giving the student that activity, now the students have to think far deeper and far more critically about the content they're learning than just basically regurgitating and saying to you a couple of things about what made FDR popular. So, and we see this you can do this with babies. We've seen this in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, where they're using this strategy around community helpers or, because of Winn-Dixie or whatnot. And then you can see this strategy, same strategy, because but and so, around cellular respiration, mitosis, the Cold War in high school, Romeo and Juliet. It's the content in the classroom that will drive the rigor of the activity. The strategy will stay the same, but that's the beauty of the strategies. A teacher leaves those trainings and has immediate tools to help a student craft and compose a much more extended response and a better sentence.
And just to kind of take off of that, this is something that is not an additional piece that teachers have to do, right? They have to learn it and understand it. But once they kind of understand the strategy, this is something that is seamlessly integrated into class. So it's not like, okay, let's do what I had scheduled. Now we're going to stop and we're going to have 10 minutes of TWR, the Hoffman method time. This is really, what the lessons we see best are when the two are seamlessly integrated. And so students are accessing the language to be able to express their knowledge and their understanding.
Okay, so now I really need your help. So first of all, let me say I love having educators in the feed, because Michelle Johnson says dazzle Chris with some sentence expansion, which I would be dazzled by anything, because I have no idea what that means. So great, there's some other comments here. Melanie is asking what we were just talking about, if that's Mary Hoffman's work. I think Lucy here says something around the Montessori method is all about sentence structure. That's something I didn't know or wouldn't know much about. But I want your help in understanding some complex ideas for people that aren't steeped in this. So first, dazzle Chris with some sentence expansion. I don't know what that means, so help me with that.
Well, the sentence expansion was one of my absolute favorite strategies when I was in the classroom, because it gives students a very methodical way to think about what the reader needs to know, and then gives them the tools to be able to add that information into their sentences. So, the way it works is you start off with what we call a sentence kernel. So it's just a short sentence like, they fought. Okay, well, that's not really telling us anything. The reader would have all types of questions. Who fought? Where did they fight? Why did they fight? So through asking some of these, this is convenient, some of these question words.
I was going to say, perfect, Alex.
Wow.
Right there.
Behind you.
This is my office. Through asking selective question words, we are helping students figure out what are the details we need to provide to expand that. So who fought, right? When did they fight? Why did they fight? So students will be filling in those details to then add to that kernel, and then they'll expand it. So, in the 1700s, the Patriots and the colonists fought the British because they were seeking their independence. So now they fought became this, and teachers, they have a lot of fun with it. We pop that popcorn kernel, and now we have this beautiful expanded sentence. And that strategy actually becomes one of the kind of most significant strategies when we teach students how to revise their own work. So they're going to look at their own writing and be able to think, reading this sentence, what does my reader maybe need to know? Maybe I could add in a how here. Maybe I need to add in the when. That, who knows when we're talking about. So, by teaching that strategy explicitly, students can expand those responses, but then they can also improve their writing. You mentioned before how students will look at their writing, I know so often, and they'll say, I'll put a period here and I'll change this word there. When we say revise, they're interpreting it in a whole other way. Right. So we teach them explicitly how to revise their work, how to improve the substance of their writing, not just to fix a couple of pieces here and there. And that sentence expansion really helps them to do that.
And because, Alex, I think that sometimes our teachers will think about, I know I was one of them, sometimes see editing and revision as the same thing. Right. And they're not. Editing, you're looking at the mechanics, you're looking at spelling, you're looking at grammar. And a lot of times a kid, for a student, they'd rather just edit. They'd rather go in and fix that spelling mistake or add that comma or that period. But in revision, you're talking about actually improving the substance of the writing, varying sentence structures, making it, making the language more vivid. It's different. It's more rigorous. So, and what you said before really resonated with me about feedback, because too often the feedback for students, make it be more, I have a daughter in 4th grade. She'll get something like, nice job, be more organized. Well, guess what, Chris? If Ava knew I'd be more organized, she would have been more organized in the first place. Like that feedback isn't moving my child. But I'll tell you what can, that our feedback is grounded in the sentence level work. So when you tell a student, using a positive to make this better, which is written language structure, right? And in 4th grade, they start doing that, right? I could use in a positive, or expand your sentence. Oh, I know how to expand. It's synonymous with sentence expansion. I'll apply a who, what, when, where, why, and how. So again, there's a common language around feedback. So the feedback, the student's actionable, and the students know actually what is expected of them and how to improve their work without the teacher putting the words in the student's mouth, which we know doesn't work either. It's not sticking.
Two things about this seem very complicated to me. For one, students, especially at a certain age level, are very beholden to 2-word answers to things. How was your day today? Fine. Good. And as parents, you try and get them, well, what was fine about your day or whatnot. We think we're being so masterful at making it happen, and we still get, it was okay. I don't know, that sort of thing, right?
Good.
Right? Good. So I can imagine having 30 of them or more in one place and trying to get them all to like expand. And the reason I can't imagine is the second thing that I think sounds like a challenge is that you don't have time. You got to keep moving stuff along. So like when I give you that paperback that's graded with the red thing on it or whatnot, I need to move on to something else. I can't have you rewrite this thing, a lot of times. Is that a challenge or do you really have time to go this deep in your writing if it's not a writing class, for instance?
I think that's a great question. And probably the answer is it depends a bit. And the teacher, has to choose what piece of writing are you going to use as the priority to really expect the students to make some substantive revisions. Maybe that's not going to happen on every piece of writing, especially not if you have 30 students and you have 5 sections of them. It's unrealistic. But revision can also happen really powerfully at the sentence level, and so by teaching students how to revise those sentences, then when they are going to write that longer extended piece, they will have more practice in actually being able to just put those, right in those complex structures from the outset. So, I think that's at least a part of it.
And the strategies, Chris, that they're using, they become part of the teacher's practice, and they're recursive. They're used recursive. So their students are seeing them often daily in the schools that we work with. They're seeing these strategies, and they're being used as formal assessments. Every time a teacher has an opportunity in some of the schools we work with to get kids to write, they'll use one of these strategies to assess comprehension of what they've learned. And so they're not just going to just ask them to, write us a postcard or draw a picture of why Egypt was great. They'll use Egypt was spectacular because button so, or an expansion. And they'll it keeps building and building. It's a very scaffolded and easily differentiated approach, but it becomes part of the language of the classroom. And that's what we've seen. The teacher's language around writing instruction, the school, it becomes a school-wide implementation or sometimes intervention in many of the cases of where we work, in the schools that we work, that it can be the game changer in a whole building. And people are asking about data. We can easily show you some of the data, again, in the districts we work with. We work across, districts in New York City, obviously, but in Louisiana. Right now, we're currently working with the Monroe City School District, which is a very high needs district of 19 schools. And Chris, what we're seeing there is it's amazing. I mean, you have to see the engagement levels and what is happening from 3rd grade all the way to 10th grade in that district. And Alex can definitely speak about just the engagement and, Alex.
Yeah. I mean, we go on a lot of site visits to the schools, and it's always such a treat because we've really gotten to be close with many of the teachers who will go and will visit, and we support in implementing the method. So walking into their classrooms, and we're talking math classrooms, we're talking English classrooms and social studies classrooms, seeing the students with their hands raised, jumping up out of their seat because they understand how to actually be providing the information. They understand the strategies, and through that, they're reinforcing what they're learning. And I think that probably feeds into why they are so enthusiastic. One classroom I'm thinking of, we had it was a 4th grade teacher, and he was doing sort of a review lesson on ancient Rome. And it was a because button so activity. All of the students in the room it was mostly boys, and they were all students of color. And it was just such a remarkable thing to see so many students raising their hand because they wanted to be the one to answer that, that sentence end with the because. And being able to see them express themselves clearly, being able to use the language of the content that they were learning was really powerful. But even more was seeing their confidence. So much of this method is about giving students the confidence. We know they're smart. They sometimes don't think of themselves as smart because when it's hard for you to communicate clearly, you start to maybe be shy to communicate because people aren't understanding you. So seeing this method help to build students' confidence and their belief in themselves as learners is really remarkable.
So Tisha Brady says, as an English professor, I've seen it firsthand for the past 17 years, and it has gotten progressively worse. The entrance testing shows us this, and a lot of college data bears it out. Melanie Acosta has been one of our more prolific commenters today on this show. She really wanted to know about like where you got your data from, what the demographics of the districts are. I think you guys just touched on that a little bit. She also says, I don't see data focused on teachers and their perceptions of their preparation to teach writing. Can you help?
Yeah, we have some recent surveys and we can definitely share, but I know in one recent survey, I think it was, I'm trying to think of where what it was, but like 71% of teachers that were surveyed said that they didn't feel equipped to teach writing. I mean, so we definitely know that it's an issue because we see it on the ground, we hear it. And then, Chris, we look at the state data, or we look at, not even state, we look at the national data. Like if you look at the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, if you want to look at data, you want to know how we're doing as far as writing in this country, look no further, because 25% of students are actually scoring proficient in writing on that state assessment. And that's
that's not good.
Nope. Not good. And
That's not good.
And the rates are far lower for students in low-income households, students with disabilities, English language learners. So, yeah, I mean, we're not. It's a crisis. Writing is an issue, and we're seeing it across teachers and their surveys to us, but actually just state assessment data, national data, right? So
now I need your help again, understanding some wonky concepts for mere mortals, right? So now you are talking to mere mortals, and you guys are experts on this. If you had to explain what retrieval practice is and the protege effect, how would you explain those simply?
Can you ask that one more time, Chris?
Retrieval practice is something that's important. How would you explain that simply to somebody who doesn't know what it is? And the protege effect, which is a different, which I think is more about you learn as you teach. But these concepts are deep within the retrieval practice. For me, I feel like I've gotten closer and closer and closer to understanding what it is, but no one really makes it simple.
Well, I mean, to speak to the protege effect, I think that, I don't think that the students have the benefit of kind of teachers learning on the ground, right? Learning as they're running. And I can speak to that because I got into teaching through the Teaching Fellows program. And so I was getting my master's and being trained in teaching while I was in the classroom teaching. I came from a background that wasn't education. And a lot of that instruction was kind of figuring it out as I went. And, I was being trained as a special educator. And, the students I was working with, they really didn't have the time for me to be trying something and hoping that it worked. And sometimes I think I was successful. Other times I really feel like my students were falling short. So I think that can it be effective? Perhaps, but in the populations that we are working in, low socioeconomic status and students who are already coming from under-resourced communities, we need to send in people who are trained and really armed with having proven strategies for success. And so to me, I think that's that important balance that we have to strike.
When you speak about retrieval, so for us, I mean, what we see is that our students are able to recall and learn and retain information far greater when they're learning it through these writing strategies, because you're actually looking at the content much more analytically and learning the content more deeply when you're able to actually write about it. So what happens is that students are able to recall and retain something that we have spoke about, and that also is really important in this, is the power of planning. We spend a lot of time about sentence level work, but I want to just explain to you that writing places such huge cognitive demands on executive functions and working memory, and teaching students how to explicitly plan before they write can alleviate some of those burdens. But unfortunately, planning is a stage that rarely gets enough attention in instructional time. And this telling a student, just write hasn't really worked. And then if students are taught to plan, the plan's not equally effective.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of times students are taught to use a graphic organizer with lots of boxes, or taught to use something with lots of bubbles. And that may be great, those sorts of tools for vocabulary building or concept building, but they don't transfer easily to actual writing, because writing is linear. And taking information and material out of bubbles and boxes and webs and all kinds of designs don't really help transfer when a kid has to write a linear paragraph with a clear beginning, middle, and end. So part of this method, and I think it's actually the best kept secret of the method, I think we're out there known for sentence level work, but I think really it's the planning piece that has been so beneficial to our students, because we actually teach students how to plan through a linear outline. And that plan really helps them to organize their ideas, understand what information is relevant, not be repetitive, not be adhere to the topic. Really they have a roadmap for clear beginning, middle, and end to a piece of writing. And so when you talk about retrieval or retention, because they can create these plans and organize their ideas and take all this information they're learning and synthesize it and put it into a plan, it really does just, again, facilitate their thinking and help them understand the content far deeper than they would have left to their own device, if that makes sense. So I didn't want to leave this conversation without speaking about how important just the whole planning process is, and that we're not really just about sentence level work. We are, obviously, it's the bedrock, but our planning work in the method, I think, really has changed the game for a lot of kids. They've told us, they've actually come back and said, the plan has helped them the most, actually being taught how to plan and not being told, hey, just write, or just use this bubble to write, and take that bubble and figure out what's relevant and put it into your paragraph. Because that's the hard part. That's the crucial step, is I got to take this information out of a bubble and figure out what's relevant, how to sequence it, put it into a logical order. So there are a lot of practices happening in schools around writing instruction that, again, I hope just come more to the forefront, and hopefully we just keep getting that message out there about that, again, not all tools or not all methods are equally effective in getting kids to express themselves clearly. And
and I think just like on that point, in order for a student to be able to really demonstrate what they've learned or to demonstrate their understanding of a topic, these tools can be that piece that makes the difference. So, one sort of story that comes to mind is a teacher who we work with who was telling us the story of she was a 9th grade teacher, helping her students prepare for the state assessments. And she had one of the more struggling groups of 9th graders that she was working with. And so she gave them a practice prompt, and they were sitting down at the computers to complete this prompt. And they worked through the period, and at the end, one of the students said, can I just have 5 more minutes? I just need to finish up. And so she gave them that time. And when he finished, she was telling us, he had his hands raised over his head, like in victory, with that MPO, that multiple paragraph outline for his composition, clenched in his hand. And he said, this was the first essay that I've ever finished. That is a moment where, that it's not that he didn't know the information. He didn't have that tool to help him plan and organize it to then be able to demonstrate what he really knew, what he was able to, to share. So to us, that is what makes the difference, giving students those tools to structure their thoughts, to organize their thinking, and then being able to rely on those sentence level skills to really have every sentence be able to help convey that message. That's where sort of the power of explicit writing instruction lies.
It feels me to go back to my guitar analogy. The more thinking you're doing about the scales that you're playing, the less thinking you can do about the flourishing, the more artistic pieces. Yep. So if I practice a lot of the scales to the point where they are like second nature, now I can actually play at another level, like an entirely different level. But there does need to be some time for me to really like practice, like
Right.
to really, and
Right.
to know things and to feel it, intuitively.
Mhm.
Michelle Johnson, who's an educator, says, Chris, learning is encoding, storing, and retrieving information. If they can't retrieve it when they need it, they didn't learn. So I don't want to hear you say, but I taught it. Students need multiple opportunities to
Right.
retrieve information.
Mhm.
Yeah, Michelle Johnson, thank you. But
Mhm.
I'm still sometimes I'm thinking, yeah, I'm gonna have to sit on that one for a while. I kind of get it. I kind of get this quote. I don't know if it's exactly what I was just saying, which is you need to be able to. There's a part of this that's really hard for me to understand. You're retrieving information, and at some point, it has to become part of your long-term memory
Yes.
Right.
for
Right.
it to be like a settled piece of knowledge.
Yes.
So you don't have to. You
Right.
can just keep drawing on it, but you don't have
Right.
to keep thinking about it.
Right.
Right.
And- yeah.
Yes. That's and that's where, again, like the example of the outlining piece, that's something that becomes internalized, automatized at some point, and really part of the a student's almost long-term memory, like you said, because again, like writing places just such huge demands on the working memory. But we know the goal is to start to get some of these practice into students' long-term memory. So that, as you're saying, I'm thinking less about making the outline and more about the content and what I'm selecting, what details I'm putting in, the word choice, how I'm going to start this topic sentence. But I have these other underlying foundational skills automatized pretty much, that now I can free up some of my cognitive energy on thinking of, the other pieces of what I want to do. So it unlocks, it's like brain liberation a little. It's like unlocking thinking for many kids.
Right.
But you're right to keep going back to that analogy, because that is what this is. Sometimes we hear teachers, Chris, say to us at our courses, I'm very concerned that I want my kids to develop a voice, a personal voice. And we say, so do we, 100%. But the issue is that without foundational skills, that message or that voice will be muddled. You need to have you have to have those foundational skills first to be able to express yourself with clarity and precision and cohesively to really get that message across. Otherwise, that message is not going to be heard. And so that's where we sort of stand on this, that you've got to really go slow to go fast, build those skills for students. And then they're free to soar once they have them. But the thing is, Chris, they've got to be taught those skills. They've got to be explicitly shown. Again, written language and oral language are not the same thing. The way we write and the way we speak are different. So you're actually teaching a student what a positive is, and say, look, you're not going to hear positives. Like, I'm not going to say to you, Chris, naturally, Chris, a great interviewer is hosting this show today. A positive, a great interviewer, I'm not saying that in my speech. I don't speak with the positives. But if I open up a newspaper right now, Chris, watch how many sentences are going to be fully fleshed out with the positives. They're all over written text. So if you could teach a student very early on, we see these babies in Monroe, in New York City, in DC. We teach them from third grade, middle of third grade on. Here's how you create a positive sentence in your writing. They do it because someone taught them how to do it. And now they have this written language structure or this skill that is going to just help their writing.
And also,
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, on that point, through writing about it, you're reinforcing what they're learning. So it helps with that retention process, because now they have to manipulate that information and they're doing something with it, right? Whether you're teaching subordinating, positives, or you're teaching using sentence expansion, whatever the strategy is, they're having to manipulate that information to then craft a more complex sentence. And that really helps with deeper layers of processing, with moving that information that they're just hearing into their long-term memory. A lot of times a lesson will, throughout the lesson, there might be a moment where everyone's going to stop. Let's just reflect on what we just heard. Doing that through oral language, using some of the strategies just as an oral language activity, or even as a written activity, it helps to solidify that information more than the multiple choice. Obviously, there's a role for that, but when you're not having to really process the information in such a deep way, then it is going to be harder to retain it.
So, something in the 1970s that was that I may have poo-pooed earlier in this discussion that was really an important part was that intrinsic learning, like things that are intrinsic to a child, motivates them to want to learn more. I do know that everything we're talking about right now, reading and writing for boys specifically, and for, very specific kinds of boys, reading is torture, but writing is even more torture, of a torturous process. So the idea that you wouldn't be depending on something that's intrinsic, to them and building off of that, to me seems really difficult. Like to just say, we're going to make you do this, sentence expansion, whatever you guys called it.
Yes.
But they want, it's interesting, Chris, because we always say that engagement is just knowing what to do. When people talk about engagement, how to get kids engaged, when kids know what to do, they feel successful, they want to do it. They, again, the self-confidence. And so what we're seeing in the classrooms that we're in with, again, I'm thinking of Mr. Harrison in Monroe, with that classroom of mostly boys, jumping in the seats. It's because these are manageable strategies, that they are structured, they are easily accessible to kids. It makes it fun. Like teachers are really making learning fun through the strategy. There's an element of also like it's a game to put this expansion together. There's like that in there. It's almost like a puzzle to put it together. So and again we'll go back to engagement. The kids know exactly what is expected of them and what to do. It's not overwhelming. Sit here and write a 5-paragraph essay for me right now. No, right now we're going to do a sentence expansion activity. You know clearly how to do this, and the kids do it. And so we're seeing things that are just. I don't know. I mean, Alex, if I'm
I think that's part of the reason we're so moved when we go into classrooms, especially where there are a lot of boys, but for all students, that they're going in and they are seeing how to use these strategies, and they see the outcome. They are able to produce something that, that sounded smart, right? That really got my idea across. And so I feel like that confirmation then reinforces the sort of the inclination to use the strategy, because they see that it's effective. Yeah. And they're not as overwhelmed by it.
I'm glad that you all are seeing that in action, because, as a parent, you really push your kids to read and probably to a lesser extent write, but you want them to develop language. You do see a challenge with certain kids to even really want to do it, to like say you're going to have to read. My older boys read Harry Potter, the whole collection, and I hated it. I thought it was boring as hell, to be very honest with you. But they devoured it. They thought it was great. Toya here has a statement where she said, kids write like they text. Well, my younger kids now never would touch Harry Potter. It's too long and verbose and kind of, so the stuff that they read is really like more kind of choppy and segmented. We've moved from YouTube, which has, on average, like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minute, videos, to TikTok, which has like 30 second
attention
videos.
Span is like
So it's getting shorter and shorter and shorter. I mean, TikTok is really, really kind of like so the idea that you might want to get them to expand, to think bigger and whatever, seems like an educator challenge. Really does seem like a parent challenge also too.
But I was just going to say on that point, I think that it's also because I think Dina was sort of saying this before, that it's in a manageable chunk, right? So we're not having them sit down and say, okay, now we want you to produce that research paper. Right now, let's do one expansion or one because button so. It doesn't have to be something so expansive to really get a sense of what that student took away, what that student really understands, and then you can move on to to the rest of whatever the focus is, and then you kind of come back to another strategy. So because it can be in those small manageable pieces, that also helps the students be able to kind of release themselves into it, because it's sort of a doable expectation.
At the end of this, and this is a question I should have asked you earlier, so you're going to be like, oh my God, that is just not fair to ask me at the end as we wrap. But you guys are called the Writing Revolution, and revolutions usually tell me that something needs to change. And if it's a revolution, it needs to change a lot, right? What is the thing that needs to change most that requires a writing revolution? Like, what is the thing you're upsetting that happens now? What's the state of the world that needs upsetting right now?
I think what our mission is to get teachers and to help teachers really have the tools to help students express themselves and use written language structure techniques to help every child be able to really, again, think analytically, read with more critically, and express themselves more coherently. And so our mission is to really, from very young ages, to have teachers or to give teachers these tools or these strategies to help students, again, think more deeper, but also to have it embedded in content. I think that's the other piece, to not think of writing as something that's done in isolation, but really to see it as a way to embed and have students think far more critically about what they're learning, and to not divorce the two, and to see them very much that writing can be in service of content. And that's one of our I guess our missions, is just to help to bring these strategies to more teachers so that they can get this by extension to their students. I guess that's maybe the revolutionary piece, is that some of the things we're teaching in these strategies or in these sessions, teachers have not seen and have been teaching a long time, like I was when I sat in Dr. Hockman's session for the first time after teaching for 17 years. I didn't even know myself what a positive was. I probably used it, but didn't even know what that term was. So teachers are leaving like really sometimes with their minds blown about the strategies, and they're excited and they feel empowered because they themselves, Chris, feel insecure about their own writing in many ways. Teachers themselves, so when they go through the method, I think their writing
improves. Lord,
and
don't even get me started on some of the emails that come. Well, Lord, that's a whole nother show.
Yes.
You can't teach what you don't know. I'm just telling you right now.
There you go.
It's going to be really hard to teach what you don't know.
There you go.
Yes.
So I will say this at the end. First of all, I'm super appreciative of you guys coming on. I hope we can talk again.
Yes.
To the listeners and the viewers and the watchers, you have seen the Twitter handle go across the bottom, where they can be reached on Twitter. But if you just search for the Writing Revolution on Twitter, you'll find their handle, and it has their feed. You can find out more information about them. And to people who are watching or listening, if you think of a way to expand this conversation and to keep it going in the dialogue or add another piece to it, I'm happy to continue the conversation. I think it's really important. The one thing that we didn't really talk about and get to that I think needs, more thinking is everybody has a role to play in the life of a child's learning. And what you all are talking a lot about is the classroom and the teacher. And I would hunger for ideas and ways in which to take this information and to make parents more armed and community members and activists more armed about something that is tangible, specific, usable, that solves the Monday problem, not just for teachers, but for parents also. Right. Like, am I now going to look at my kids' work and now start making them rewrite it and use these, what were the
because buttons go.
Yeah, that's right. Right. Like, so now as a parent, you may have just made my kid's life terrible now.
Exactly.
Yes. All right.
But that's just it. Even if it's not, looking back at their work and making them do that, it's embedding it into the conversation that you're just having in your house, and encouraging them to, when they just say, oh, my day, it was good. What's another, like, that doesn't give me much information. What's another way you can really express that? Use a different word. So for parents, a lot of times it can be folding the awareness of the strategies. You can fold it into that conversation to be able to.
This is what I want in the long term. When I say I'm desirous of this is what I want on the long term. There are a lot of these science-based wonky things that people are learning and grappling with and understanding. And the 99% of what's written about them are going to be directed at middle class, upper middle class, college educated people. What I want someone to do is actually write this for the people who are not in that group, in that class, because that class and that group have a penchant for writing to each other constantly, right? But we always say we want parents to do better at home. We always say we want more engagement. We want them. Well, we can't be having this conversation at the top that's so important and critical to the development of children and their learning, and keep writing it to ourselves, right? And not writing it for civilians.
And we are happy to help that. We have a lot of parents come to our courses, but we would love the day to get this to more parents in the communities that we serve and in the schools that we serve, to give them these tools. And some schools have done that, Chris. Some of our schools that we work with, New York City schools in particular, have given parent trainings to their parents, show that,
That's
hey, this is what your students are learning in the classroom. Here's how you can take this and do this at home. So they've actually given PDs to parents in some of these communities. And I would love to see that even continue further. But that's the beauty of the strategies, because it can apply to any content that you are learning. It doesn't matter what it is. And you can take those strategies, embed them throughout. So
well, I will just say this, that would be the real writing revolution for me. Is that, like, if lay people were starting to ask their kids these, expand that sentence for me, right? Like, and that doesn't seem too hard to do. Like, we can learn to do that.
Right.
And help, and then a teacher's job is easier. If we're doing that at home, the kid's getting it in both places.
Right. Reinforcing it.
Reinforcing
100%.
it. So.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. If you have any more information or something comes up that you guys want people to know about, please send it to me and I'll share it with folks. Anybody that has ideas, thoughts, questions about this particular show, or questions for our guest today, you can email me at Christopher@activist.com. Again, that's Christopher@activist.com. And I'll be happy to be a connector for you to get you information that helps you better understand the topic. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having us on.
This was great.
Yeah, and to the people watching and listening, really thank you, because you guys make this happen every day. I feel so appreciative of people that actually spend the morning with me every day and engaging in these ideas and these thoughts. It's a true blessing. So thank you.
That's great.
Thank you so much.